So I want to share with you some thoughts on an impossible Sedra. It's impossible. It's just too much going on, and everything has been said already. Everything has been said. So for us to dig into something, all I can do is tell you what came up for me over the course of this Shabbos. So I'm going to share with you um, a tragic thought, the first one. And the tragic thought is right at the end of the Bible. Lo kam navi od b'Yisrael. There was never a prophet in Israel, Moshe, like Moses. Asher yeda'u Adonai panim el panim. Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses. This is from Deuteronomy 34:10. It's the last parsha. It's the last chapter of the Bible. And on this tragic verse, the Medrash says something really disturbing. And there shall not arise in Israel again a prophet such as Moses. And it's being medayek on the word B'Yisrael. We know it's B'Yisrael. Why are you telling us that? It should have said, Lo kam navi od kamoshe. There was never going to be a prophet like Moses. What do you mean in Israel? It's a redundancy. We've been talking about Israel. The whole Bible is about Israel. And so the Medrash says, well, yes, in Israel there shall not arise again a prophet like Moses, but among the nations there will arise a prophet like Moshe. And who was he? Bilam, the son of Baal. Bilam, the son of Baal. And they sought the difference between prophecy of Moses and prophecy of Bilam. I just was totally blown away by that Medrash, meaning that Bilam never is criticized in the Bible. We're assuming that he gets divine oracles. Nowhere does he get criticized until 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 Medrash and rabbinics. Now, if we look at Devarim, I'm coming at this from the outside, okay? If we look at Parshas Devarim, we have 3 chapters in Bamidbar talking about this Bilam and Balak and Bilam. When you come to Devarim and Moshe is looking back at this whole pericope in this episode, look what he says. We get 2 verses, 3 chapters of Numbers get whittled down to 2 verses. Al davar shelo kidmeschem belechem. The Midianites and Moabites didn't let you go through. Ubamayim b'derech b'tzeischem mitzrayim. And then the next thing, v'lo ava Adonai Elohecha lishmo et Bilam. Bilam wanted to curse you, and God did not listen, pay attention to Bilam. Vayapoch Adonai Elohecha lecha et haklala livracha. So the purpose, according to Moshe Rabbeinu, at the end of his life, at the last speech he gives, when he recounts the episode before Midian and Balak and Bilam's oracles, he whittles it down into 2 statements. One, God completely turned around, did not allow himself to be listening to the curses of Bilam, meaning Bilam was a soothsayer and he wanted to curse you, and I would not listen to his curses. In fact, what I did was I switched them to bracha. And why did I do it? Because God's love for Am Yisrael. That is how it's whittled down. So we really need to look at this whole story episode in the light of Moshe's recounting of the episode in Devarim. Now, something happened in 1967 that I want to share with you before we dive into the text, because it is of such importance that it changed for the first time the way we actually looked at the Bible in terms of extra biblical evidence for what took place in the Bible. We have very, very little archaeological evidence. But here in this Deir Allah Tel, we found the following inscriptions. Second, how do I do this? I've just lost how to share. How do I unshare? Okay. And now I'm going to share the screen, and this is what we found. These inscriptions. And in 1967, a Dutch expedition under Franken discovered these fragments of inscriptions on a plaster in a Transjordanian site called Tel Deir Allah, about 5 miles east of the Jordan, not far from the northern bank of the Yabok River that flows into the Jordan. In the Hebrew Bible, this place is known as Semek Sukkot, the Valley of Sukkot, Emek Sukkot. And we see that in Psalm 60 and Genesis 33. Many of the plaster fragments were restored in the manner of a jigsaw puzzle, as you can see here. And the resulting combinations were published back only in 1976, 11 years later. Composed in a language similar to Biblical Hebrew and dated to the late 9th and early 8th centuries BCE. Unbelievably old. The inscriptions attest to the name of a seer by the name of Bilam Berbar, Balaam the son of Beor, for the first time in an extra biblical source of the biblical period. And so the Deir Allah inscriptions tell us how this Bilam bar Beor was referred to as a divine seer, a choser, and he was visited at night in a dream by gods who revealed to him that an impending misfortune would devastate the land. The seer, greatly distressed at this news, assembles his people to disclose to them what he's learned. And in these inscriptions, Bilam is depicted as a heroic figure who strove to save his people and the land. And in content and style, the inscriptions, Balaam is depicted, the inscription noticeably resembled the Balaam pericope that we're going to discuss. So that any discussion of the role of Bilam in biblical literature must henceforth take the Deir Allah inscription into account. Absolutely stunning discovery, showing the extra biblical proof of this character. Now, this character gets a completely different hue when we come to the monotheistic Bible. So let's now dive into a couple of texts, just a couple of psukim that grabbed me. Okay, so if you turn to chapter 24, which is the third and last oracle, it begins, Vayar Bilam ki tov beinei Adonai levarech et Yisrael. So Bilam by this time realized that it was good in the eyes of Yudke Vovke to bless them. V'halo halach kapam b'pam likrat nechashim. Now this time, when he went up to the top of the Pisgah on Peor, he did not go to his divinations, nechashim, to divine. But what he did is Vayoshes el Hamidbar. He just faced the wilderness. Vayisa Bilam et Einav, and he opened his eyes. We're going to come back to the eyes of Bilam. Today, my podcast is called The Monocular Vision of Bilam. He casted Vayar es Yisrael shochen lishvatav, and he saw Israel dwelling according to its tribes, the three on each side around the Mishkan. Vatihi alav ruach Elohim, and now he became inspirited with God. Vayisom Sholo, and now, just like it says in the other three times, he declaimed his parable and said, Vayoma Ne'um Bilam Beno Ba'ar, the words of Bilam, the son of Beor. And now it adds, Unaum Gever, if you can see this, my text, Unaum Gever, the words of the man, and I highlighted Shesum Ha'ayin. Shesum Ha'ayin, what on earth does that mean? So Alter says something beautifully, he translates it. The utterance of Balaam Beor's son, the utterance of the man open-eyed, the utterance of him who hears God's sayings, who the vision of Shaddai beholds. And then he says, Unum hagever shesum ha'ayin, prostrate with eyes unveiled. Oh, so poetic. Again, shesum ayin. Nu'um shomea imre el, he hears the utterances of God, Hashem machzeh Shaddai, nofel uglum einayim, while fallen and with uncovered eyes. Fallen, what's that mean? The unveiled eyes hark back to the unveiling of Bilam's eyes by the Lord's messenger. A certain irony, Alter says, is generated by the link between the two texts. He doesn't see the donkey. Balaam's declaration here of his visionary power comes to remind us of his blindness when he was incapable of seeing what his ass plainly saw, until the Malach Elohim intervened. So what does prostrate means? Nofel ugluenaim, fallen and with prostrate eyes unveiled. So he says nofel refers to the state of ecstasy in which the seer is flung to the ground. There are abundant indications elsewhere in the Bible that this sort of falling was expected as a consequence of the descent of the Spirit on the seer or the prophet. Thus spaketh Alter. I think in Caesar it says, Cassius says, me think he hath the falling sickness. This is the falling, when the spirit of prophecy enters. Now let's look at Rashi. And now we come away from the Pshat, and Rashi is quoting the Sifri, and he's quoting the Gemara, Shesum ha'ayin, with pierced eyes. Now the Gemara takes this very literally. Eino nakuva, literally, one of his eyes was punctured. Umotze lechutz, and was taken out. The chor out of its socket. Nira patuach, so it looked open. Ulashon mishnahu, and it's a Mishnaic language, the word shatum, sheyishtom v'yistom v'yigov. It's a Mishnah of Avodah Zarah, speaking of opening and sealing a barrel of wine. You open it, then you seal it and dry it, yishtom. Or, Lefisha Rabbaseinu Amru, and this is our rabbis who said, that's now we're going to quote the Gemara in Sanhedrin, because Bilam, it said earlier in chapter 3, 23:10, and you all know this because it's famous, we learn it in school, Mi mana afar Yaakov, who can count the dust of Jacob, umispar et rova Yisrael, and who could count the numbered a quarter of Israel, rova Yisrael, umispas rova Yisrael. And so Rashi there says rova, it doesn't mean a quarter, one of the divisions of Israel in the wilderness. Here he continues to the Tanchuma that uses the word rova in a sexual sense. Rova means copulation, multiplication, mating. And the Tanchuma says that Bilam is amazed with not only the numbers of Israel, but the way Israel made those numbers, the mating, the offspring that emerges from their relationships. He's referring to the commandments which Israel performs with the soil and the dust, and to the commandments relating to sexual relations, to say that even in the areas of life to which regular people appear very low, Israel brings forth and sanctifies, according to the Maharal. So here in our Rashi, Ulefi Rabboseinu Omro, Umispa Rova Yisrael, numbered the matings, I'm taking that in the metaphorical, not in the quarter, but in the matings of Israel. Mosai Tovo Tipo, what happens? He sees a vision of the Ribono Shel Olam. She'HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yoshev Umone Reviosan. He's sitting upstairs and counting the nights of lovemaking of Am Yisrael. Umone Reviosan, counting them. Mosai Tovo Tipo She'noilod HaTzadik Mimeno. To see when will come the drop of semen from which this tzaddik will be born. And Omar Belibos. So Bilam says in heart, Misha hu kadosh, someone who is that holy, that removed from this world, that transcendent. Umasharsov kadoshim, and he only deals with angelic worlds. Yistakel b'devarim halalu. He's going to go look in people's bedrooms and see what's going on when hanky-panky is taking place, to see what's going on with the drops of semen. And al dovo zeh, because he critiqued that, nitmeis eino shel Bilam, his eye was blinded. Rashi is giving us a dramatic explanation of the shasum einov, the piercing of the eye. The piercing of the eye was because mido keneged mido, the way he was criticizing God's lowering himself in order to look at the hanky-panky, the relations of Am Yisrael, of the men and women, that critique resulted in him being blinded in one eye. That's the shusum ein lav. The yesh meforshim, and there are those who say shusum ha'ayin means the opposite, open-eyed, the way Alter translated it. Okay, then nofel uglu enaim. that goes along with what Alter says. Noifel al ponov, he would fall on his face, lefi shehu orel, because he had no power, and he fell on his face, lefi shehoya orel, because he was uncircumcised, and it would be disgusting for him to be revealed b'mokum skufa. Okay, that is what Rashi is telling us, and I would like to go to where Rashi got it from, which is the Gemara in Sanhedrin. So let's go to the Gemara in Sanhedrin. And the Gemara in the Sanhedrin 105 has a whole back and forth on Moab and the prophecy of Moab. And the Gemara says, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Bilam chige beraglo v'achas hoya. Bilam was lame in one of his feet. Shene'em, as it says, vayelech shefi. Numbers 23. Normally, shefi means he walked alone. But here it's translated as limping from the word shof, which means to slip or to become disjointed. Now, the Maharsha says something interesting. He says that he is lame because his leg had been crushed when the donkey crushed him against the wall on the road to Moab. And in spite of his pain, Bilam was so anxious to curse the Jews that he proceeded on his journey until he came to Moab. Vayelach shefi, he came to Moab, shefi, limping. He probably had a femoral fracture against the wall. Shimshon b'shtei raglov. Samson was lame in both of his legs. Shenema shvifon ale orach hanoshech ikvesu. So you can see that that word shefi already by Samson means lame. Now let's go to the interesting part of this Gemara where Rashi got his statement. Suma ba'achas me'einav haya. He was blinded in one of his eyes, as it states in our pasuk, shesum ha'ayin. The eye was open, indicating, according to the Gemara, that whose one eye, shesum ha'ayin, only one eye was open because the other eye was closed. Because he had described himself as the man with the open eye, Numbers 24:3, meaning that only one of his eyes was open. Only one of his eyes could see. The other eye was closed or blind, according to Rashi. And here is the source for the Gemara stating that he was blind in one eye. Absolutely stunning, because there was nothing in the pshat that to suggest that. And so what's going on? And so we have to dig deeper into the world of, beyond the world of Agadata, and to see what this could mean possibly for us. And the Hasidic masters pick up on these two midrashim. The first midrash being that Bilam was blown away by the fact that God had reduced himself to looking into the bedrooms of Am Yisrael. He just couldn't get over that. And really, what was his problem? His problem is that there is a divine world and there is a human world, and the two should not meet. And the Hasidic masters pick up on Bilam as an amazing misnagid. There's the world of the divine, and that's transcendent and holy and removed from the dirty, lowly aspects of human reproduction, the lowly vegetative functions of the human beings and the animal world, the animal-like aspects of a human being. And they make Bilam into this misnagid. And I'm going to read first from the Ohev Yisrael, the Abderov, and he says, Yesh lo al derech remez. I know it's not pshat. I know it's not drush. It's b'derech remez. There are 4 levels of interpretation. Sha'Kodesh Baruch Hu Yoshev u'Mesaper Riviosen Shel Yisrael. That came straight out of Tanchuma, that Ribono Shel Olam is busying himself, looking when men and women are getting together in order to see which drop will produce the next tzaddik. And this particular instance is what blinded him. Physically, metaphorically, he was blinded by this concept of a pantheistic notion of the divine that is soaking in the world, that's even involved and interested in the lowly vegetative functions of the world. She'ama mi shehu tahor, someone like God who is pure. Umasharsof tahoirim, yotzitz badovaze, he should be absolutely involved in such dirtiness. Umizer nismaseinov, as it says, Ne'um Hageva, Shesum Eyaim. Adkan. That's quoting the Medrash. Now listen to him. V'ha'inyan, the Aptarov, the Heilige Aptarov says Azoi. Ki Bilam Arosha Rotza Laharisa B'chol Mal Sheyucha. Bilam wanted to curse us and to do evil to Am Yisrael in any way possible. V'choshav bazeh. So he thought, he schemed, he thought, you know something? I can yuchal lahora lohem b'mashe yistakel be'inyan ascholas avoyes gufam. He says, I'm going to go back to conception, and I'm going to find something about the conception of a yid, lehistakel be'enei hara, liros bara, beguf, kol echod misrael, me'es herayin, mitzad tavas av ve'em. I will find a flaw in the holy souls of Am Yisrael, in the very fact that they were born, like Paul says, from the copulation and the disgusting animal me'es herayom mitzad tavas av ve'em, from the taiva, from the desire, the improper desire of a man for a woman, which is so lowly. I will find the flaw in the creation of their souls from that moment of conception. You should know that the Ishbitz picked up on this. And he said that, what is the definition of Dveikus? The Dveikus is called God consciousness. And the purpose in Chassidut of Dveikus, unlike in Misnagdim, Reb Chaim Voloshin is a whole different definition of Dveikus. But for the Hasidic world, Dveikus means God consciousness at all times. At all times, even when you're eating and drinking and sleeping, there has to be das, which is God consciousness. So the Ishbit says, but at the moment of making love, at the height of love, by definition, you can't think of it. You won't be able to perform. So you have to have a momentary lapse in God consciousness at that moment of ecstasy. And he says the most amazing thing. He says, by the mitzvah of Hakel, there is a unique mitzvah of coming up on the regel to Yerushalayim. And for that mitzvah, the women and the children are brought along. That is for the mitzvah of bringing the korban chagiga. That's only the males. But the once a year mitzvah of Hakel, where everyone comes up for the Birkas Kohanim, men and the women. So he says, why the children? They're not even bardas. Why would you schlep them all the way up to Yerushalayim? He says, because you're being metaken that moment when that baby was produced. It's a stunning word, the Ishbit says. There is that moment of conception where you have to have hesech das from the Ribono Shel Olam. You have to be so completely involved in the Gashmias that is a moment. So Bilam says, I'm going to get them at that moment of conception. Mitzad tavas av v'eim. That moment of taiva, of desire, animal desire, I'll chap over there. The Aptarov says, he wasn't talking philosophy. Oh God, why are you up there and busying yourselves with the hanky-panky down here? Nah, he's bringing to attention to God that moment of lack of awareness of God consciousness. He was trying to denigrate the zivugim and the marital bliss of Am Yisrael Lohara Lahem Mitzad Gufom, to do it from the side of their bodily functions, in which, by definition, they had to have a lapse of God conscious. That's what he wanted to do. And it's a stunning way of looking at that Rashi. Now let's go back to why was he blinded in one eye? And I want to share with you the last interpretation of Rashi. And that is, let's go back to Rashi, because then I want to bring an insight. The penetrating eye, again. His eye was bored out and had been extracted, and its eye socket could be seen to be owed. Okay. But then the other said, Umispa et rova Yisrael, meaning God himself was occupying himself with the counting of issues of marital life of Israel, waiting the time when a righteous man will be born. He therefore said, does God, so holy and his ministers are holy, direct his mind to such matters? On account of that, Bilam's eye was blinded. Okay. Now I'm going to share with you, because that's what bothered me, this monocular vision. What is spectroscopic vision? We talked about this yesterday. What does double vision give you? Having a second eye gives you depth perception. And the Gemara in Chagiga says a person who is summa ba'achas be'inaim cannot go ole l'regel. Cannot come. Why? The Gemara says, Shalosh pamim bashana yero'eh kol zechurecha. 3 times a year, your males shall be seen in the nifal, shall be seen. It's in Pashas Kisiso in Shishi. Shall be seen, yero'eh. And so the Medrash says, the Gemara in Chagiga says, yero'eh, shall be seen by who? By God. Just like God has 2 eyes, so too you have to have 2 eyes when you're oile regel. So a summa, someone who's blinded in 1 eye, is potter from bringing a chorma chagiga because of the literal reading of the verse, yeh ro'eh. It's very disturbing Gemara for me. So someone who's blinded in 1 eye, who has a cataract, can't go up. Because God's perfect vision requires 2 eyes. So I wanted to suggest that the depth perception is what's at stake here. God is saying to us, when you're coming to me, oile regel, you have to have depth perception. You need both your eyes to see beyond the text, beyond the halacha, beyond the surface of coming up to Yerushalayim, to have a nice family trip, to bring a korban, to have a good meal, to have fun, meet your friends, have a drink. No. You got to have depth perception. What does it mean, oile regel? What does it mean to come to Yerushalayim? Yerushalayim is the heart. 3 times a year, we have to recharge the batteries of the heart. That requires going beyond the halachic requirements. It requires depth perception. Now, I want to take that insight, which was my insight, and I want to bring it to the Spinker Rebbe. And I want to share with you, lastly, his insight. Vayosem Mesholo Nuum Bilam Beno Bero Nuum Magebe Shusum Ayin. This is our monocular vision that he's quoting from. And the Gemara in Sanhedrin Kuf Hey says Bilam Sumu Baches Mi'ayin Shenema Shusum. So he quotes the Gemara in Sanhedrin. This is the Biure Imre Yosef on our Parsha. And Behuva Papashas Rashi, and we've done that already. We went through that. So Yeshlomer, and now he brings this down to the avoida of a yid in dveikus, not the way Ishbitz does it in a very dark manner with regarding the intimacy of a yid with his wife, but now he brings it into a highly philosophical notion of, as I approach dveikus, there's a two-step approach, and Bilam knew that. He knew about Chassidim already. Lefi ma shekosav b'sforim hakdoshim, avodas Yisrael pasha shoftim, the Koznitzer Magid. Now he is quoting the Rebbe from Koznitz. B'zeh lashona. Hinei derech avoda anachuna, the appropriate path in spirituality. Before I daven, before I do mitzvahs, the prerequisite to come to Torah, lehistakel tomid, al gedulas haboire baruch hu. This is Tanya 101, right? Before you start davening, you have to have his boinanus, a meditation on the greatness of the cosmos and its creator. Asher bara hashamayim u'shmei shamayim v'chol tzvon. And he was the creator of the entire cosmos and the hosts and the spiritual worlds. Umikulam ikar ritzona b'avodas ha'adam ha'shofel. And from all of that, ikar ritzona is the avodas ha'adam ha'shofel. That for the sake of the whole creation of the cosmos, the Ribono Shel Olam's whole purpose in creating all this amazing stuff is for the worship of this lowly man, that he picks up his tefillin and his tzitzis and he davens every morning. That's what the world was created for. Ubechol zos, now number two in the worship process, tzorich lizkor. Now you might think, oh, look at me. God created the world just for me. Look at me. Ubechol zos, tzorich lizkor shifluso v'chatoso mimei kedem. He has to remember his lowliness and his sins from his early childhood, to have a broken heart. And it requires these two pillars in your avodas Hashem. You can't just look at me, I'm a big Talmud Chacham and the world was created for me. And you can't just say, I'm a gornished, I'm a nothing, and I'm full of shame. You need the balance, the knife edge. The Yiddish Kodesh had an amazing pupil. He was a businessman and a pharmacist, Reb Simcha Bunim of Pshischa, and he said, in one pocket, I have a petek that says, Bishvili Nivra Ha'olam. The world was created for me, and I keep it in my right pocket. And in my left pocket, I have another petek, and it says, V'onochi Ofer V'efer. Abraham says to God, what are you coming to me? Who am I? I'm just dust and ashes. And I keep those two pockets in my pockets. I have to keep reminding myself, this isn't an easy task. What man has accomplished technologically, Soloveitchik's man, Adam 1, through science and industry and everything and building, if they don't collapse. And on the other hand, addiction, and we're subject to the addict within us and without us, and we're just human. Those two live on that knife edge. And now comes the Spinker Rebbe and says, non mishe mispalel v'yovid Hashem rak b'machsheves gedula saboire ve'eno maktines. Now what happens if you just take the right pocket and serve God like a good Chabadska, and he does his bonus on the Gedulas HaBoire, but he doesn't do step 2, which is maktin es atzmo, make yourself small, asher al yedei kach mitga'eh beruchon, and so he gets arrogant. Baruch Hashem ani mispalel v'yosek Torah mitzvahs. Look at me, Baruch Hashem. This is what I've accomplished. Al zeh isa b'soif tikunei zoya, sumo ba'achas me'enov potav min ariyah. This is what the Zohar says, quoting the Gemara in Chagiga, that he's blind in one of the eyes. The right eye is to say how great God is. The left eye is to say how bad I am. That's the function of the two eyes in the Zohar. If you have only one eye and you think how great this is, you don't have maktin es atzmo, you didn't make yourself you're potter from going to Yerushalayim. Oile l'regel, you're potter. Ki odom tzorich liftoach einov. The Spinker says a person has to open up both his eyes, both his pockets. Achas listakel al gavos haboire, and ashnia lischos ketanas atzmo. One to remember the greatness of God, and one to remind himself of his smallness. Now he brings it back full circle to Bilam. Bilam sumo ba'achas me'enov, rotzaloyma. So what does that mean now, according to this Hasidic interpretation? He knew of the greatness of the Boire. He was a seer. He was a soothsayer. He had access to the divine. Shehare Hayanovi. Remember, we started our pericope today with comparing the last verses of the Torah in which says, Lo kom Yisrael od Moshe od Novi, but Yisrael lo kom. But the Umas Ha'olam did have a Novi on the level of Moshe. And that was Bilam. He had access to the divine. But he was blinded in one eye because Rucho Gavo v'Nafsho Rochmo, but he didn't have that second eye of humility, and that's why, he yells at the ass. He's blinded by his own arrogance. And so the take-home message for us today is the monocular vision of Bilam is now brought by the Hasidic master to teach us a lesson thousands of years later as we pore over the manuscripts and the parchments and fragments of Deir Salam, that we too have to live that schizophrumkeit, that understanding that being chosen is not the way it's portrayed, that we are the chosen people because of greatness, but because we live on that knife edge between being open and accessing the divine and being given this gift of our mythical rituals of behavior, Torah and Avoda, but at the same time, always reminding ourselves that we are human, that there are moments of indiscretion and moments where we have absence of the divine God consciousness. Have a wonderful fast. Have a wonderful week. We should meet with blessings.